Did it. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode. Redo. Fart sounds. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Jodo Cast, your Star Wars gaming podcast. This is episode 99. My name is Evan Lewis. I am, of course, joined by Leo Andri.
Of course. Sorry, I couldn't think of anything better this time. I think I used that one last time.
You did, but it's tried and true. And so is Joe Latovsky.
That's the rumor.
Are you going to be our Huckleberry?
I think I should steal from Behind the Bastards and use What's Crackin' My Peppers, because I think that's my favorite podcast.
I don't even know what that is.
It's a great show. Everything you don't know about the very worst people in all of history. The latest one was What's Ringin' My Bells. What's Scootin' My Noodles.
Yeah. Oh. There
is that going to be a T-shirt finally? Please, T-shirt man. All right.
I would buy a Noodle Scooter T-shirt, especially because like that reference is falling so far out of the mind frame of Star Wars fans.
It's like nobody really gets it but us and like people who listen to us at the very beginning.
The true believers. Hey, true believers.
The new people would be like, "Oh, you made a T-shirt out of an emoji on your Discord."
And you know who would be first up to get that T-shirt? Our patrons. You guessed it. And they would get it first because they are so incredibly awesome and they make all things possible. In fact, I think I've heard that said. In patrons, all things are possible. Through the patrons give us strength. Through patrons, our chains are broken. I think that's the patron code. Not to be confused with the Sith code, but I mean they're very similar from what I understand. And we appreciate everything they do for us, and we are always looking for cool ways to say thank you to them. If you're wondering what the heck I'm talking about, you should go to patreon.com/thejodocast and see a whole new world. I will never sing again. I promised I wouldn't sing.
I thought, no, you can sing as much as you want. We haven't hit that patron milestone yet.
Yeah, we haven't hit that level, the Evan never sings again level.
That's right. So if you want me to never sing again, go to that website and join the anti-Evan singing army.
Technically, isn't that sort of like extortion or something? If we're like, you have to pay us money or we're gonna.
It's think of it as insurance. You wouldn't want something bad to have happen, like me sing again.
Yeah, it's not saying he's gonna sing or he's gonna not sing, but the odds are gonna slide a little bit if you slip us a little song.
You just never know. One day you could be going to work and then Evan starts singing. It could happen. I'm not saying I'm gonna do it.
Maybe your wife has gone away to work and all of a sudden she hears Evan starts singing. Such a terrible tragedy could happen to somebody. It's hypothetical.
Oh. I'm just thinking out loud here. And if you want more information about whatever it is you just listened to, go to jodocast.com. You can follow the links to all of our social media, including the Patreon and including the Discord, where we apparently live now. We're there all day, every day, talking about Star Wars and whatever, and picking out the weirdest gifs you've ever seen. So, come join us at jodocast.com and our Discord and the patreon.com/thejodocast. And now, as promised, episode 99. Let's talk about... Wait a minute, hang on. We're not going to talk about just random whatever today. We've got a very special guest. We've got an amazing interview, and I can guarantee it's amazing because we just did it, with Alex Kane of StarWars.com, talking all about his new book that looks at the behind-the-scenes story of Star Wars, the Knights of the Old Republic. I almost said the Old Republic. It's Knights of the Old Republic, the game. Arguably the best Star Wars game ever. I will fight anyone who says otherwise. And we had the pleasure of talking with him. So we will get to that interview imminently. But first, per Joe's suggestion, lightning round, what you been playing, no explanation, just titles, which would make for an awesome dime store novel title. No explanations, just titles. With that, Joe, go.
Legion, X-Wing, Battlefront 2, and that's it.
Leo.
Battlefront 2.
What?
Too bad it's lightning round. You can't explain your decisions.
Yep.
He did that on purpose. Me. I can't even think of anything. Call of Cthulhu. Wait, that's not Star Wars. But that's it.
Call of Sarlacc Pit.
Yes. Call of what's her face from Legacy of the Fate of the Jedi. Space Cthulhu. Force Cthulhu. What was her name?
What?
Leo.
Oh.
Help me out.
Stupid ass Abeloth.
Yes, Call of Abeloth. There you go.
Or you could also do Waru from Crystal Star. He was kind of a Lovecraftian sort of being. He was very out of place in Star Wars.
Like all Lovecraftian beings in Star Wars.
But I mean, it makes sense since he was supposed to be a being from a different dimension that was trapped in the Star Wars dimension.
That description did not help.
Yeah, I would I'm not going to recommend you go read Crystal Star to figure it out either.
I am never going to read that. That's what Wikipedia is for. Okay.
And now, on with the show.
I feel like
if it's yes, then I can say that more definitively. On with the show.
All right.
Wipe this pathetic planet from the face of the galaxy.
The Force fights with me.
Get on those gun turrets. Bring her to me.
All Republic forces, pull back.
It is too late to retreat, Admiral. There is no escape for us. You are strong, child, but I will break you.
I'll never fall to the dark side.
This is but a taste of the dark side.
Hello, everybody. We are joined tonight by a very special guest. We have joining us. If we didn't already say it in the intro,
I mean, it's also
we're saying it again
in the title of the episode,
and it's in the title. But it doesn't hurt to say it more than once or 2 or 3 times. We are joined by freelance journalist and StarWars.com writer and one of the hosts of the new podcast X-Winging It, Alex Kane. Thank you for being here, sir.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me.
Well, it is our pleasure, and if you wouldn't mind just telling the listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got to this point.
Yeah, I guess I've been a freelancer for about 5 years, and in the last 3 years, I've been doing a lot of nonfiction, freelance journalism, and doing stuff for StarWars.com. And and all that. A lot of that time, I've been working on this book, Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic, from Boss Fight Books, who they publish small volumes or short volumes about a single video game, and they kind of delve into the cultural significance, or maybe like sort of the personal significance that, authors feel toward these games, and kind of really explore a single title in depth for a book. And I pitched that about like 2 years ago now, and it's coming out on April 9th. That's probably sort of my favorite game, or certainly my favorite Star Wars game of all time. And it's definitely had a big impact on the course of things, especially in recent years. So it was really fun kind of digging it back up and doing a bunch of playthroughs and taking notes and interviewing all these people who helped make it happen. So the book ultimately is kind of like this making of, behind the scenes book, sort of like the Rinsler making of Star Wars, that kind of thing. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun for people who like Star Wars, and especially people who like Star Wars video games, seeing behind the curtain in a really sometimes intimate way that you don't often see with things that are, you have these big corporations like EA and Lucasfilm. It can be hard to get access to that kind of thing and see the reality of that stuff. And hopefully I've achieved that.
Yeah, we all got a chance to read the book. Thank you for that. And I thought it was great. I loved it. Once I got into it, I just plowed through it. It's, like you said, it is, it's kind of like a making of, like, it chronicles the development of the game pretty much, and you have a lot of really great insights and interviews with people who were there and how they felt about it then and how they feel about it now. And I really enjoyed getting that look at the game that I'd never seen before.
Thank you. That's awesome to hear. Yeah, it was hard to get everybody that I wanted to get in there, but I definitely had a lot of luck tracking down sort of the key people whose names you kind of know from that project, and then a handful of people who you probably haven't heard of as well, and kind of getting like both sides of that story. And it was a ton of fun. It was like an absolute dream project for me. It was my first book, so like in the process of writing it, it's like I had to kind of figure out how books are written. But it was fun because I was doing like StarWars.com articles and things like that, and then I was sort of like reading all this nonfiction to get inspired, and so I had sort of this image in my head of like, okay, I really love like The Art of the Last Jedi, for instance, and I really love books like The Disaster Artist, that paint a very like personal human story. And then, it's like, how do you find a balance between those two things and make it accessible and explore Star Wars, this like big, messy, massive IP, right, that everyone knows, and, not screw up the book to an extent that people are going to be like, oh, well, on page 18, he says that The Phantom Menace was the first Star Wars film since Return of the Jedi. Well, obviously, he's never heard of the Ewok movies, What a poser. You know what I mean? Like, so, you have these, like, funny little worries while you're working on it. But ultimately, because KotOR is such a, like, central piece of my Star Wars fandom and why I care about Star Wars to this day, is like, I never felt a ton of pressure in terms of, like, it never felt like work the way that sometimes freelance journalism can feel, like when you're writing just online. And it was something that I was able to really take my time with. And I don't know. It was pretty surreal talking to some of these folks and getting to hear, these stories about what it was like in the voiceover booth with, Ed Asner recording like a Jedi Master, or like, how like Darth Revan's costume was dreamed up, or how HK-47 kind of was inspired, things like that maybe you hear like little snippets here and there over the years, but I was sort of able to paint a complete picture in some ways. I like to think, because, I don't think there's never certainly been like a book length account of like, the making of Knights of the Old Republic. And I think that if any Star Wars game really deserves that, it's sort of like the KotOR games, right? And
What about
and the older,
sorry,
what's that?
Masters of Terras-Kasai? Does that game deserve the same?
Oh my goodness! You had to work it in.
I have not played that one yet, but I am eager to, because I've sort of like started to appreciate fighting games in the last couple of years a little bit.
I don't
more.
think that'll help you appreciate them.
Oh, okay. All right.
So I don't remember if you mentioned it in the book or not, but how many times have you actually played through Knights of the Old Republic?
Oh, like since it came out, probably like close to 20 times, something like that. Like about 20 times, I want to say.
Wow, I thought I was doing good at 6.
Really? I don't know. I want to say that. It's one of those things where, and I've actually only made it through KotOR 2 in its entirety one time, to give you kind of like a contrast, okay? But I am the type of person who, back in like the 90s, you would buy a game and you'd play it like over and over and over, right? Because you didn't just like have $60 every week to blow on like whatever the new game was. So you kind of learned how to really sink your teeth into something and play Star Fox 64 like 100 times or whatever. So, or at least I did. And KotOR was kind of that game for me, like the rainy afternoon game from like whatever 2003 to 2005 or so. Yeah, it's an easy game for me to pick up and play and just be like, oh, I don't want to put the controller down. Not a lot of games are like that nowadays, right? But
yeah,
it's a good time.
So before we started recording, you had mentioned that on a different interview, someone had asked you to describe KotOR for somebody who might not know what it is. I'm going to assume, which is dangerous, that most of our audience probably is pretty familiar with the game. So instead of describing it for them, can you describe the game in 5 words or less?
5 words for less. 5. Okay, yeah, 5 words or less. Okay, so it's like Star Wars.
That's 3 words already.
We'll give him the light.
It's like D&D Star Wars, right? D&D Star Wars, 4,000 years ago. I don't know how many words that is. 4,000 years before the rise of the Empire.
We'll accept it.
D&D happened.
And I think best Star Wars game ever is not underselling it.
I feel like most
or
people
overselling
would
it, rather.
agree.
Yeah. I think, a good 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 would probably say it's their favorite Star Wars game, right?
I feel like
of a certain age.
Yeah, there aren't many other games that like make it up there. I think Battlefront 2 2005 and Republic Commando are the only two that jump to mind of other ones. Maybe the older games like X-Wing and TIE Fighter.
That's because you're too young, Joe. So
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, you like that Super Star Wars. That's your number one.
Oh God!
Oh
goodness.
Man, brutal. It's brutal.
The game made me hate the Jawa theme music because I hated the Sandcrawler level so much. I could never beat it.
So as I was reading the book, besides just absolutely tugging at my heartstrings, because this is a game that is near and dear to me, and the descriptions of how everyone was feeling about the characters, especially in the last third of the book, was like, that's me. I saw myself in all of those descriptions of people really getting invested in it. But it really struck me how many of the people involved with this game. I mean, it's not unfair to say that Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights were huge, but this one really put a lot of people's names out there. And to see James Olin still at it, like I got to speak with him during the development of the Old Republic MMO, and to hear a lot of the same phrases being used about how to craft a Star Wars RPG, it reinforced for me just how much these people put into these games, just how much of themselves, how hard they try to make the KotOR games, and the one KotOR game and then later the MMO, to make it authentically Star Wars.
Yeah, I think James Olin, he's sort of a quiet guy who, when I interviewed him, he was still at BioWare. He left BioWare very recently, but he was sort of doing an arranged interview with like an EA Star Wars PR flack on the line. So his interview was a little bit more reserved and kind of, less personal, but I get the sense that that's the kind of guy he is anyway. But very cool, and I get the sense that if you want to point to one person and say, KotOR was that person's baby, I get the sense that James Olin is to thank for a good majority of the things that people really, really connected with in that game. There's a lot of names that come up. Casey Hudson.
Yeah. His name is even, is so big and so well known to people today.
Yeah, and now he's sort of not exactly in James's role, but in a similar role. He's sort of the rock star kind of running BioWare now. But yeah, I think like KotOR was where he first made his mark and was sort of visible in the press, kind of talking up KotOR while I was in development and things. And he's a humble guy who people would tell me anecdotes about, just how dedicated he was, and he was sort of a very hands-on, programmer, modeler type guy, and very nuts and bolts at the time. And then you have people like, Drew Karpyshyn, who was, steering the story. And I think he tends to get like sort of all the credit, right? Like, because he wrote like Star Wars novels, right? Yeah. So, and certainly that's like how I felt for a lot of years before I was like doing games journalism and stuff. It was like, well, Drew Karpyshyn's the guy who came up with the story and all that stuff that I love, but it's not that simple. He had nothing to do with HK-47, and that's why, except for the name. He did come up with the name, but, HK-47 is not in his Revan novel, and the reason is he doesn't feel that he can write humor. Like, humor's not his thing, and it's funny, you kind of, the more you dig, the more you learn that sometimes people in video games don't really get the credit that they're owed, like if you interview 4 or 5 people who worked on the same video game project, you'll have 2 people say, oh, I did this thing, and then the other guy you interview will be like, well, actually that was all my idea, and actually I programmed that. So it's interesting. You get like conflicting narratives about stuff, and so like part of the trick of the KotOR book was like puzzling that out and trying to ask people like, hey, do you remember if this is true, like even remotely? And they're like, I vaguely feel that I remember that, or that was so-and-so's contribution. So yeah, that's the interesting thing about going back, like 16 years, 15 years, as I was writing this book. And,
it does not seem like it was that long ago that I was asking Leo. I distinctly remember this. I said, hey, which of these RPGs should I get? Star Wars Galaxies or Knights of the Old Republic?
Yeah. I definitely would have said Knights of the Old Republic.
At the time, you were very invested in Galaxies, which also comes up in the book.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you have these 2 producers like sharing an office, right? And one was sort of steering the ship for LucasArts on KotOR, and one was steering the ship on Galaxies. And yeah, LucasArts was under a lot of pressure at the time. Is the picture that we got there for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned there's quite a paragraph, and most of the paragraph are titles that came out between 2001 and 2003. I might as well read them all. So you got Star Wars Starfighter, Super Bombad Racing, Galactic Battlegrounds, Rogue Squadron 2, Rogue Leader, Racer Revenge, Jedi Starfighter, Jedi Outcast, Clone Wars, Bounty Hunter, Jedi Academy, Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike, and Galaxies.
Yeah, they were absolutely just like juggling way too many projects as producers, and it's a sharp contrast to today, right? You've got
Pause for laughter.
yeah, you've got the Respawn project, which is like my most anticipated Star Wars thing, probably, if I'm being honest with myself. And then you've got DICE supporting Battlefront 2, and then you've got like a little smaller projects. You've got the Jedi Challenges AR head-mounted display. You've got the VR stuff that ILM Lab is doing. And then you've got like sort of the cute little like arcade games on Facebook and the mobile games like Galaxies of Heroes. But it's definitely a contrast to LucasArts, who were like, and that must have been like a George Lucas thing, right? It must have been like, well, we made 1 billion toys and we sold them because, these folks will buy anything with, a gonk droid in it. So let's, right? Like, so there must have been a certain philosophy driving that, where, we'll just make as many games as we can make without our guys dropping dead in the office, right? And they sure did. It seems like they also canceled a lot of stuff too, though. So, game development is wild, and it was even wilder back then.
Yeah, there's a lot of dead, never saw the light of day Star Wars games, that's for sure.
Yeah, we did a whole episode about that a while ago.
Yeah, and then a bunch more got canceled after we made that episode.
Speaking of that, did you just talking about things that could have been? There's a part where you talk about how some people were actually pushing to have, because they got the kind of the deal to make this game was sort of built off of people seeing Baldur's Gate and being kind of blown away by that game. So there were some people who were pushing for KotOR to actually be like a top-down isometric game like Baldur's Gate was, which I didn't realize that, and that's just wild to me that we could have had a Star Wars RPG done in that style. Did you come across or anything else like that? I mean, maybe not even necessarily about KotOR, but just about some of the other games that you've been doing journalism about.
It's interesting. It's like there's a lot of things that come up in the book and elsewhere, that have been documented where there are ideas thrown out there, and then, that will get picked up by another outlet, another publication, and they'll be like, Darth Maul was almost, insert like the wackiest game premise, right? And it'll be reported as like, this almost happened, but actually it was maybe like Hayden Blackman at the office at LucasArts in the 2000s being like exhausted and like hyper on coffee and like threw out this wild idea that nobody took seriously or whatever. But journalism is interesting. It's like it is a little bit of a game of telephone, right? We saw this like a week ago where Lucasfilm Games as like an entity has existed for several years now, like since Disney started putting out Star Wars stuff again. And then these job postings went up that actually said, instead of saying Disney Interactive and then parentheses Star Wars, they said Lucasfilm Games, and that got picked up by IGN and PC Gamer and all these places as Lucasfilm Games, the original name of LucasArts, is coming back. Disney's bringing back LucasArts, And of course that's absurd. That's like not at all what was actually happening. It was just purely a case of an informal internal moniker being shown out, in public, kind of. But that had already, it had already been on StarWars.com. StarWars.com had used that Lucasfilm Games team nomenclature before. So my point being, if I circle back here to my point, like these big companies like Lucasfilm and LucasArts back in the day and EA, like they're pretty opaque about things, right? Like it's hard to get to the like true, the truth of it sometimes. So, but there were all these ideas, like in KotOR's case, KotOR 2 comes out, and then everybody had a pitch for KotOR 3 because KotOR 1 was the greatest Star Wars game that had ever been, and KotOR 2 was pretty damn amazing as well. And so you had LucasArts internal teams like, hey, let's do this thing that is essentially KotOR 3. Maybe it won't be called that. You had Obsidian begging to make KotOR 3. You had BioWare like, oh, well, KotOR 2 is pretty nice, but like, hey, maybe we want some of that action again. We now can like take a breath and maybe take up a Star Wars project again. Here's our idea for KotOR 3. So, and some of that stuff is documented in Rob Smith's book, Rogue Leaders, I believe. Rogue Leaders, The Story of LucasArts, something like that. Maybe getting that title wrong, but yeah, I think LucasArts canceled more projects than they put out, and as far as Star Wars goes, because everybody just had so many ideas and pitches. Things would happen as pitches, and you might have a room. George Lucas might come into the room and say, "Show me what you got," and you've got 4 to 10 teams at LucasArts like, well, here's the idea that we came up with, right? Well, that may get reported as like, this game almost happened. And that stuff is fascinating. I mean, no doubt about it. Things like The Force Unleashed came out of those like pitch sessions, I think.
Yeah. I was about to bring that up when you mentioned Hayden Blackman.
Yeah. And that's sort of like where he really got to shine, I think. That's sort of his baby, is that first Force Unleashed game is sort of his, real legacy in my view, as someone who kind of got to the games in like a certain period of time. But yeah, what else? I mean, there's definitely a lot of examples of things that could have happened or almost happened. But yeah, I mean, George Lucas, if he had a note on something and he said, I don't like this, we're not doing that, when he owned LucasArts, that was Holy Writ or whatever. That was like, well, yeah, I guess we got to listen to George, right? So things are a little bit different now. Ironically, you don't have that sort of George Lucas figure, but you do have what more sort of constraints, right? Like, let's be honest, like Knights of the Old Republic as it exists would not get pitched in 2019 and get made because it doesn't have Han Solo in it. It doesn't have R2-D2. It doesn't have Chewbacca. You got to think about like,
gotta have Chewbacca.
It's kind of a miracle that some of those games happened, like Star Wars Demolition, and just like Bombad Racing, like all those goofy things. Yeah, it's sort of like like the DC universe right now. If you want to talk about like the movies, it's like they have like the opposite of what Star Wars has, right? They're just like going to throw everything at the wall and see what happens to stick, rather than having a plan now. And yeah, I guess that's closer to what LucasArts did for a time. And I think that it was a big, I mean, the way that people tell it in books and in articles through the years, through reportage, is like, it was sort of a lot of just risky, little experiments that, EA is going to put out a game. They're gonna be using these expensive cutscenes. They're going to be using like the Frostbite engine, and it's going to take like all these people to make this thing happen, and mocap and things like that. That just back then, games were a little bit simpler, a little bit cruder. But that's not to say that something like Shadows of the Empire wasn't like, the most grueling development ever. It's just, it's weird. It's, they're very risk averse now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing is like every big publisher, like EA or whoever, like every big publisher is like that now. I mean, if you look at like the success of Call of Duty, I mean, those games don't really change much from game to game, and
yeah,
it's interesting.
Do you think that there's, if at some point down the road, Disney were to say, "Hey, EA, your exclusivity is done," do you think that there's room for maybe not all the way to, like you were saying, where there's all this crazy weird stuff like, Demolition or whatever getting made, but maybe a return to somewhat those older days where we could see 4 or 5 different studios handling Star Wars and churning out maybe 2 or 3 games a year.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I guess that comes down to the industry at large. Like, the industry is going through a rough time right now. Like, EA just laid off 350 people. Activision Blizzard just laid off 500 people 3 weeks ago or something. Like, all these studios are just laying people off, and it's like you see the games coming out like right now, and they're very like things like Anthem even, or Apex, or not to like single out EA, but like those just come to mind because I've been playing them. But like, there's all these games coming out, and you can see how they're not making a game that is the same scale as, say, Battlefront 2 or The Witcher 3 or whatever, like Fallout 4. These kinds of games are not coming out right now because they're shipping with fewer cutscenes, they're shipping with fewer features, fewer playlists and modes and things like that. And I don't know. I guess I can't speak to like the nature of like their exclusivity contract or anything like that, but like, you've got this weird thing where the industry is just in a really, really fragile state right now, and you do kind of wonder where that's going to lead. Star Wars is made for sort of these big blockbuster experiences, which kind of began with like Shadows of the Empire, arguably, off the top of my head, or Dark Forces. And, more recently you got like Battlefront 2, you had like the Force Unleashed games, these big sort of blockbuster games, sort of in the vein of like Halo or what have you, Mass Effect, sure. These big flashy movie-like games. And I don't know. It's like I hope that those games continue to be made, and things like God of War and Spider-Man PS4. Spider-Man PS4 is my favorite game of last year probably. And like a lot of people would love to see Star Wars get that same treatment that Marvel just got. And it's hard to do that. It's I think that one thing that may be an issue is the fact that, and not to say that like I 100% agree with like Chuck Wendig's proposal that he shared, but like, you know what I mean? There's this idea that canon is restrictive, and the more canon is added, the more that it will be restrictive, right? Like, you eventually run out of like places to color if you color in the whole picture and all the lines all neatly, right? Like, Battlefront 2, it's like, okay, well, Leia said this thing in this young adult novel, so that means that the fleet is going to be here during this part of the Battle of Endor, and Admiral Akbar is going to be here, so we can kind of leverage that in Battlefront 2 story, and that's all great and amazing, and I'm always in awe of that stuff. It does seem like it will get harder and harder to achieve that as like more games come out, and so, I mean, you can already see it, right? Like, Jedi Fallen Order is coming out, and it's already like set in a different time period, sort of the Order 66 Dark Times period, I guess you could call it. Yeah, I don't know. I would love 3 Star Wars games to come out a year. But yeah, it's like, are they gonna let people break from canon? Are they gonna let them kind of, like if you play like fire up Skyrim, right, for like a big mainstream example, it's like you can do all this stuff. You can join the Thieves Guild. You can go kill somebody. You can save the world. You can be part of you can become a vampire and do this. I think people want Star Wars experiences that are like that, and you have that with the Old Republic, right? But it's not like a new game's coming out where, oh, I can become a bounty hunter or a Jedi or a scoundrel or all these different things, right? Be like a handmaiden on Naboo. You don't have those games coming out right now. And it's hard to kind of picture that at the moment where, this respects canonicity. It's very like canon friendly, and you can do anything you want in the Star Wars universe. So it's sort of like the story group setup is a little bit maybe stumped in terms of, I have no idea how they feel about games. They probably love games, but it's just like, you can kind of put yourself in their shoes and be like, oh, games work best when you have freedom and can do like literally anything in them. Players want to like mess around and tell their own stories. And that goes against kind of what Battlefront 2 did. And I love Battlefront 2. I wrote like a rave, not review, but sort of feature about it for StarWars.com when that launched. And of course, you had the loot box controversy. So PR killed my article because they thought it would be sort of like a, put a target on my back. But
yeah,
it's interesting.
Thoughtful.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's like, what players want is not necessarily going to be what, Story Group or Ryan Johnson or the, Game of Thrones guys or the Mandalorian want to do with Star Wars. So, there is like a hierarchy a little bit. There is sort of a, and I guess to circle back to KotOR, what is special and why people do care so much about the game is like, no one can tell you who Darth Revan is unless you're like really invested in like the Old Republic and it's like expansions, right? Like if you just played KotOR 1, you pretty much got to tell your story a little bit to an extent, right? There's limitations on that, but yeah, that's kind of what makes KotOR special is you don't have those canon concerns, I guess.
Yeah, there's so much of what you just said that I wanted to piggyback off of. One of the things you mentioned is about AAA games. Like these days, half the time, a AAA title comes out and it's in bad shape. Like it has to go back to formula. But, they've already gotten the $60 or $100 for special editions out of us. So if some studios are willing to, extend their development time to make a Star Wars game that delivers, I think we would be more in favor of that. Joe and I have often said and agreed that if Battlefront 2 shipped 2 years ago?
Came out,
I guess it
fall 2017.
17. Okay, so a year and a half ago, in the state that it's in now, there would have been, I think a far quieter outcry.
There wouldn't have been any outcry.
I still would have cried.
Leo would have
cried.
Yes, Leo would have.
Just Leo.
But in general,
to be fair, he's pretty loud when he complains.
I would be
about stuff,
shouting into the
true.
void, though, probably.
That's why you're on a podcast. That's what we do. We shout into the void. But you had mentioned Obsidian earlier, and I am a strong defender of KotOR 2. Not to spend too much time on the sequel, but KotOR 1 from the outside, from 2003 until reading your book, just looked like a Babe Ruth home run. Like, of course it succeeded. It was a perfect formula. We know that was not necessarily the case, but with the follow-up of KotOR 2, it was very evident that time constraint that you mentioned, it became very public that a 1-year turnaround on the sequel to top the Game of the Year was kind of a losing bet for whichever studio was going to do it. And I always tell everyone, KotOR 2 is a good game. They just had no time in which to develop it.
Do we know how much time Respawn has been working on Jedi Fallen Order? It's been a few years now, right?
So when they did that EA Star Wars E3 video, that was 2015 or so, and you saw Respawn doing mocap with lightsabers in that video. Okay, so So unless that was smoke and mirrors, one can assume that they've been working on it for like
That might be just how they hang out in their
years.
free time at Respawn. They put those suits on and lightsaber fight.
Yes. Oh God, I hope so. Oh, I love that thought. Yeah. No, but so there is sort of that sense that they've been working on this a long time, and they're continuing to work on it, and they've also been like hiring a bunch of people for quote unquote Respawn Star Wars projects. So it's almost like, question mark, like, are they already working on the sequel then? Is that how big Respawn has gotten since being acquired by EA? You just don't know because these companies are so secretive. So it's like, are they hiring those people now to polish up and finish this game that comes out in 6 months, 7 months? I'm inclined to think that like it can't possibly all be that unless they're planning to add like story DLC to it. But EA is notorious for, I shouldn't use the word notorious, but they're known for putting the pressure on sometimes, like with Anthem, right? Like Anthem has been in development since 2012, but the bulk of that game was reportedly done in about 18 months. Okay, and so you have like this incredible IP development thing that they did with Anthem. You've got all these amazing like technical concepts, and you've got like all this great art and story stuff that they've done, but still the game ships, and it's like sort of buggy, and people just aren't happy with like the amount of story and the amount of like free roaming content, like in the free play and stuff. And it's like, these are all symptoms of the state of the larger industry. It's just the fact that if a game has Star Wars in the title, it's under an ungodly amount of scrutiny, right? Like Battlefront 2 was. It's not like Battlefront 2 is the first game to put loot boxes in the game that you have to pay for, that are randomized, that are in some way tied to progression and things like that. It just happened to be this massive $60 Star Wars game with a single player campaign attached to it and all these multiplayer modes. So it's like, oh, this is the game we've been waiting for, but actually it's got this stuff tacked onto it that we really hate in other games, so we're going to make this like the scapegoat for like all that is wrong in the industry. And the industry's just reeling from all that. Like, they're trying to figure out, okay, well, we can't monetize our games in those scummy ways anymore. How do we do it? And,
it's helped. I saw, because I've been playing a bunch of Apex Legends, and because of Battlefront 2, loot boxes are illegal in the country of Belgium, and I saw someone was posting the content they get from the random drops in Apex. It just gives them the crafting parts, so everyone else in the world gets these random items, but if you live in Belgium, you just get crafting parts, so you can get whatever items specifically you want. I'm jealous. I guess I could use it.
It's sort of the randomized thing is the issue, right? Because that's what makes it sort of feel like a slot machine. Yeah, and
I mean that's exactly what it is, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, it's been like a wake up call. I think it's like, okay, you messed up all those other games with loot boxes. Call of Duty. It's like, okay, we expected that from Call of Duty. We expected it from all these free to play games, but you did that to our Star Wars. Like, how dare you? How could you do this, right? And I think EA has paid for it. In terms of having to sort of solve that problem. Whatever that problem may be, there's a lot of debate about this. Pundits will say, well, like, it's just sheer greed. It's a matter of like, things have to be a certain way in order to pay people. I mean, it's not like I'm an accountant at EA and know what that looks like, that picture really looks like. But, I mean, you can see them cutting corners on things like Anthem, right? Because Anthem probably would have been a masterpiece if it had come out 12 months after it did. But you know.
That's my take on most games that come out today. I'm like, well, I'll judge it in a year, and then if I still don't like it in a year, then it's not worth my time. Just, so many games are just like, a year from now it'll probably be what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, Yeah, and I've been a Destiny player since that game launched in September 2014. I've kind of played that off and on, and yeah, like you really see these games that ship, and people are like, "Oh, this isn't at all what I was promised. I gave you $60, and now you want $40 or $90 for all this DLC. Like, what's wrong with this picture?" And yeah, I don't know. I feel for the people who are at their desk, sort of boots on the ground in the trenches, sweating at their computer until 11 p.m. at night, not seeing their families or whatever because they're trying to get some emote done before they clock out because, these kids these days need, 12 emotes every week.
Speaking of which, Battlefront 2015 had much better emotes than Battlefront 2017. I missed or was it? I think they had a Gonki. No, there was someone data mined some emotes that didn't get put into the game for some reason. They had the 2017 Battlefront almost had the emote of Han Solo's dance from the Star Wars Kinect game.
Amazing.
And like if that had been included at launch, I don't think they would have had to do anything. They'd be like, but you can do the dance from the Kinect game, and everyone would be like, yeah, all right.
10 out of 10.
It evens out, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's a lot to love about Battlefront 2. The campaign was my favorite thing about it. But yeah, that 2015 game, it was weird. Like, you had the season pass format back then because that's how every shooter did it. $50 gets you all these different DLC packs. Well, they sort of ghettoized it, right? So that if you want to play the Rogue One content, you're just playing over here in the Rogue One sandbox with the Rogue One kids.
Right.
If you want to do the Death Star content, you have to do just the Death Star content with just the people who want to play that right that very minute. And if the population was starting to kind of dwindle or sag, or you were playing it at a weird hour of the night or something, it's like, oh, I can't find a game of Death Star, Battle Station. That's kind of bizarre. So yeah, it was sort of like there was all this great content, but because of the season pass, whatever you want to call that sort of formula, everything was kind of just split up into these sections and
right, and it was all really good content too. The Death Star stuff was fun. Scarif was fun. There's a lot of content from that old game, or from the 2015 game, that I'm like, I wish that was still in 2017. But yeah, it was not an ideal model, but obviously as we've seen, what they're on now isn't, I guess, as ideal either. Or what they started
I missed
with.
the Walker Assault mode from that game a ton. That was really good.
Dennis Brandval, one of the lead guys at DICE, I don't know if he'd said it before, but recently he said that the whole progression system redo set them back 6 months content-wise. They wanted to have Clone Wars stuff out before the Solo season, and that got pushed back. So they're like 6 months behind everything that they had planned on doing because they're like, okay, we'll fix this.
I believe it. And that's another point, right? Yeah. Like, the movies dictate certain things now because the movies are new and shiny. And back in the day, right, in 2004, it's like you had the DVDs to promote. That's about it. Different time.
I remember getting game demos on the DVDs. I think, was it...
It was the Attack of the Clones DVD that had Republic Commando on it.
Yes, I remember that. And I think maybe one of the Revenge of the Sith DVDs had a demo for the Revenge of the Sith game on Xbox or something.
It had a making of featurette for sure. I do remember that's Hayden practicing lightsaber combat and stuff.
Is exactly how I learned how to spin a lightsaber, like the silly moment in Revenge of the Sith where they spin and don't hit each other. That behind the scenes of the making of the video game, watching Hayden Christensen do it, and the video game people are like studying him, like, oh, this is how we animate this. I watched that as a kid a whole bunch, and that's how I know how to do that with a lightsaber.
It's an underrated game, I would say. I would argue that Revenge of the Sith, the game, is pretty fantastic.
I don't know if I ever played all. I remember playing the multiplayer at a friend's place and thinking that was super cool because it was like just a 1v1 fighting thing, and The only other thing I remember is Obi-Wan going, "We must use the Force to move this wreckage," and those are literally the only two things I remember from that game. And maybe it had an alternate ending where you kill Obi-Wan and then kill the Emperor or something as Anakin.
Yeah, it did have one alternate ending. That's right, the sort of like dark side Sith ending. It had James Arnold Taylor doing Obi-Wan. I don't know if that was his first time, but that's kind of a neat little thing to go back and see him doing. He has sort of his James Arnold Taylor Obi-Wan that he does that's sort of like slightly Alec Guinness and slightly just new and Clone Warsy. But in that game, he's really trying to do his Ewan McGregor, and
His Ewan, yeah.
it's good. It's good stuff.
Yeah, during that first season of Clone Wars, he was really trying to channel Ewan McGregor, and then after a season or two, sort of settled into his own, which I like his own quite a bit more.
I've got the Obi-Wan Clone Wars pop sitting on my computer right now. Clone Wars Obi-Wan is best Obi-Wan.
He's very good. He's very good. Probably my favorite thing about the Clone Wars series, as far as characters go, is his Obi-Wan. I think, if I'm being really honest, he's really good. But I mean, there's so much to love in that show. It's not like I'm saying that with like a negative connotation. To be clear, everything good is good in that show. But
and that brings
Obi-Wan's
us a little back
character.
to Battlefront 2. There's so much stuff in that game that is a love letter to the show, as far as set pieces and little Easter eggs and stuff.
You're talking about like the newer multiplayer stuff.
Yeah, and I mean the Camino map
fantastic.
is straight out of that season 4 arc, or the episode called Arc Troopers. It's that invasion essentially, where the droids come, and it's a lot of little stuff like that.
Really good.
Let's see. I'd stop.
So segueing out of Clone Wars, you had mentioned in season 3 during the Mortis arc, there was supposed to be a cameo by the best Sith Lord.
Yes.
And of course, that's Darth Revan.
Yeah. Some people know this, but go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, that's it. Go right ahead.
I was just gonna say, some people are kind of aware of that, but yeah, I think it's like there were going to be 2 or 3 Sith sort of appearing before the sun in like a completely deleted scene. I think that you had the Bane appearance that you saw in certain like in guidebooks. You would see him with the insects, the sort of like scarabs that he covered himself with.
It's like a coral reef.
Yeah, it looked weird in some of those illustrations, but that was sort of like the version that was nearly canonized for Darth Bane. When he has all those things on him to cure he got some kind of disease or something in Rule of Two in the second book by Carpiscian. I can't remember that second book very well, but I did enjoy it.
Yeah, that was Rule of 2.
Yeah.
The second
as
one
you mentioned,
was Rule of Two.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, they are rather devoid of humor. Drew was not selling himself short.
Yeah. I really like the tone that he struck in Path of Destruction, but yeah, it's sort of not your toddler Star Wars, is it? It's sort of it's pretty dark, but I did love it. Still love that one. But yeah, you had the scene where the son was sort of talking to these spirits of the dark side, one of whom was Darth Bane, one of whom was Darth Revan. Perhaps there was a third one. I don't know if they ever modeled the third one. You can find the what remains of this deleted scene like online, various places.
And I think the concept art for Revan and Bane, if you just Google image it should pop up.
Yeah, and Revan looked very much like he does in Knights of the Old Republic from 2003, which is, man, that would have been a treat to have that. Of course, now it frees them up to canonize him later with a little bit more freedom. But
that's what I want to know as how likely do you think it is at this point, given Revan seems to be one of the most persistent fan favorite Legends characters, maybe besides Thrawn. We've already got Thrawn back. How likely do you think it is that we'll see Revan finally burst into canon. I know a lot of us were like, oh, maybe he's the voice in the holocron in Rebels Season 2 from Malachor, and that turned out not to be a thing. Do you think it's
right?
Do you think it'll happen? Should we keep hope?
Yeah.
Or should...
So just like, I guess I'll put the disclaimer that I know nothing about anything, but
Right.
like as far as future projects or anything, but like, yeah, you have the presence in Rebels, who it's a female voice or a very female sounding voice from this holocron that Ezra finds on Malachor, which it's not an accident that there's a planet called Malachor where a bunch of Sith died in this like atrocity, right? And that came up again in one of the Age of Republic comics with Darth Maul and Palpatine. So like clearly Malachor means something to the, what do you call it? The, brain trust at Lucasfilm, people like Dave Filoni. Malachor has significance, and why does it have significance? Well, gamers would say because KotOR, man. But yeah, so that female voice to me sounded very like Kreia from KotOR 2, who was like Revan's master as a Jedi, I believe, at one point. And I'm really not like a KotOR 2 scholar, okay, like, but I, I sort of just obsess about that first game, but I'm pretty positive that the Kreia was Revan's primary master for like most of his time as like a Jedi Knight, according to Kreia in that game anyway. But yeah, but there's the possibility that Revan is a woman in canon. There's a possibility that, Revan is going to be nothing like the Revan that we think we know or whatever, the Revan that we played as. So that's always interesting. Part of me, when I heard that voice, I was like, oh, Revan's a woman. And then, of course, I was like, well, Filoni's probably thinking Kreia. And he almost said at that in that interview at like Celebration 2017, where he like nearly said the name, and he's like, but I'm not supposed to say the name, so I'm not going to say it yet. And so in the meantime, the character's called the Presence.
I feel like all they said was
he
it's
is such a tease.
Not Ventress, because it's Nika Futterman, the person who voices Ventress. I think they're like, it's not
Correct.
Ventress, even though it's the same
Correct.
voice.
Yeah.
Or actor, anyways.
I guess two main points. Okay, so Heather Antos was like the assistant editor on the Marvel books.
Oh yeah,
in the canon era, she's no longer with Marvel, to my knowledge, unless she's like
she's with
returned
Valiant.
secretly. Okay, gotcha. And she, at the time when she was at Marvel, she said on Twitter, "I would love to make a Revan miniseries in canon Star Wars comics." Obviously, that has not materialized yet, and she's gone now. So that's kind of like, oh, ouch. And then, of course, you have Lord Momin, right? Charles Soule's original character. And Momin is a lot like Revan in certain respects, right? He kind of looks like Revan a little bit.
He's that guy from the Lando comic and the more recent Vader comic, right?
Yeah. The mask is in the Lando comic, which is so cool. Like it's basically like his soul is like imbued in the mask, kind of like how their souls are kind of in the holocron, right? Like they're not Force ghosts, but they're
right. Kind of like how we see Bane in the Clone Wars. There's some kind of weird spirit presence of him, but it's not really him. But it kind of is. But it's not.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like he's imprinted himself through the dark side or something.
That was the
moment feels unique.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that is the reason why George cut Revan and Bane from the Clone Wars in that scene, because he was like, you know what, the Darksiders, they don't get this like everlasting life bit, so they're out, because that doesn't fit with how Force ghosts work. You can only do that if you're a good guy.
Well, clearly he didn't read whatever book.
George Lucas didn't.
Was there ever like a pitch meeting where some guy in the back's like, well, actually, George, if you read the Truce at Batura or something like that.
I think that's the meme where the guy gets thrown out the window.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you have to imagine that these people were pretty nervous around George, or like if you watch like the beginning, John Knoll, like it was all his idea to make Rogue One, and they made Rogue One, and it was like this big success, relatively speaking, right? It was like this huge hit. But like in 1997 or 8 or whatever, he's like talking to George Lucas about these, special effects decisions. He's nervous as hell. Like he's afraid of him, right? Like, because, George is like this, he's like the father of Star Wars, I mean, I don't know. It'd be hard to give George Lucas a lecture on canon, right? Like, it'd be like, well,
I know
George,
there's someone out there who would totally do it and not realize that the irony or the just how ridiculous it is.
I would be the red shirt guy.
I'm sure we've all met.
I will be red shirt guy at the convention and do that. For those that remember red shirt guy.
Are you talking about the You Invented Tauntauns, that sketch from Robot Chicken, or no?
Oh, that's a good reference too. I was thinking of the guy that was at BlizzCon one year and asked them, that red shirt guy. I'll be that guy.
Oh man. Yeah, that was unfortunate. I don't know. I felt bad for Blizzard that day, but then they laid off 800 people or something
after reporting record profits.
Yes. It's it's our best year ever, and you guys are all fired. So it's hard to be like, oh man, that poor giant corporation, Activision Blizzard. But I did feel for those guys on that stage when Red Shirt guy was like, yeah, oh man, brutal. But yeah, I don't know. It's George Lucas is an interesting figure, and I think his influence and his presence is still felt, even though maybe he's not at Lucasfilm ever, right? But if he called him up and said hey, I have this idea, they'd take it into consideration, and they'd be, whoever's talking to him on the phone would be more nervous than George. I think, I think there's probably some kind of there's a respect there. Right? He's sort of like the Don Corleone of the Star Wars camp, sure. Right?
I'm sure there's a good...
Filoni's like Michael. He's like, it's okay, Pop. Yeah. I've got it.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know. But George Lucas seems like one of the coolest human beings on the planet. And I'm jealous of anyone who's ever had to argue with him about some canon nonsense. But... yeah, I don't know. In the KotOR book, I do sort of bring up how licensing was very willy-nilly back then. It, the sort of nitpicky things, if they weren't coming directly from George, then they were kind of just a little bit trivial, but people would argue about them anyway, right? Like you had the expanded universe sort of wasn't George's concern, I don't think. He didn't really.
No.
Well, that's why back then they used to have like 4 or 5 different levels of canon.
It was like a George level of canon, or like G canon, and the TV and the games and the comics and the infinities and the what your friend down the street
the Marvel
said.
Comics.
Yeah, the Marvel comics had their own one. Which,
but
how about that? How about we get a Jackson game? What if Jackson's the main character of Jedi Fallen Order? Or
I think he's more likely to appear in Smash Bros.
Yeah.
Or he's the main character in Masters of Terrascusai Returns. That's going to be the next game because he's known for his flying rabbit kick, right?
there you go, rabbit punch.
Well, I love seeing.
Before we get, sorry, go ahead.
Nah, it is nothing. It was silly. It was a Nintendo thing. Go on. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just gonna say we're getting pretty deep into our discussion, but before we get out of here, wanted to ask if you've gotten to try any of the Fantasy Flight tabletop games. As much as we talk about video games, we spend a lot of time on like the RPGs and the miniatures and card games. Have you gotten to sample any of those yet?
I have not. I'll be honest. I live in the Midwest. I live in the middle of nowhere. I grew up in a town with like 8,000 people, and I would have a lot of trouble getting together. Like, if I wanted to play like the Force Awakens beginner game, throw together like an RPG campaign, I think I would kind of struggle to get a group together for that. Is the tragic truth of it. Unless I did online, like over Discord and Twitch and stuff like that. And I've never been like a DM type. I'm not somebody who is going to be getting into the rules systems that much. My fandom is sort of outside of that realm. And that's just because I grew up in a small town. You know, my Star Wars was books and video games and movies. So, but you know, doing things like the journalism and writing the KotOR book, of course, it's really made me want to grab that West End Games reprint. You know, the 1980. You know, there's the new edition of the '87 game, and you know that I would love to play that. I would love to play a lot of the Fantasy Flight stuff, but I just haven't had a chance to yet.
If you're within spitting distance of Indianapolis, you can hit up Gen Con this year and try them all.
Yeah, I do.
I will chauffeur you around.
Yeah, I know a couple people who go to that like almost every year. So yeah, I could probably stumble into Gen Con and yeah, sort of get to play for a day or something if I wanted to.
It is. I mean, if you try them, you'll probably not be able to resist. I'm gonna call that right now. If you try Legion or X-Wing miniatures in particular, I think is the easiest to fall in love with very quickly.
Yeah. One of my old editors is obsessed with X-Wing, and when there's like an expansion coming out, you know, he's out there buying the expansion packs and stuff like that. And it does seem like it would be really up my alley. You know, I love the Starfighter stuff. You know, in Battlefront 2, if I'm playing by myself, I'm playing like Starfighter Assault, big TIE Fighter fan, A-Wing fan, stuff like that. So yeah, I could see myself really falling into that rabbit hole. The last time I played a tabletop game and put, you know, thousands of dollars and thousands of hours into it was Magic the Gathering, and that was like sort of 2013, 2014. I got really deep into that.
That was a good time for it.
Yeah, like the Theros block was where I started.
My favorite.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of the best times of my life was when Theros was new, and I was like, hey, I'm going to learn Magic the Gathering, and yeah, I had a blast with that. I don't play Standard anymore. I never really go draft, but I do play the new Arena app, you know, the free-to-play online game now, and having a blast with that pretty frequently. So I guess, like, yeah, as close as I come to regularly playing tabletop games is Magic the Gathering Arena. So kind of a sad answer, but someday I'll like get a job in a big city. Hopefully, you know, somebody's gonna offer me a sweet job someday. I'm sure of it. It'll happen, and then I'll move to an urban area, and I'll get to, you know, gather with other human beings who want to play Star Wars tabletop games. But in the meantime, I'm stuck playing Battlefront and KotOR. So.
Stuck.
Not a
playing.
thing wrong with that. Stuck playing.
It's the saddest thing you've ever heard. Let's be honest. That's the saddest thing you've ever heard. But no, I would love to play the Fantasy Flight stuff for sure.
Well, maybe sometime down the line. Not right now, because. But you are more than welcome to be a guest on our off again, on again series we call Clumsy and Random, where we play this Fantasy Flight role-playing game. Just kind of like a one-shot, totally improvised, seat-of-the-pants adventure.
Yeah. One-shot stuff, that's the extent of my experience with, like, D&D and Pathfinder is I did a one-shot Pathfinder campaign that my friend put together. And, yeah, I had an absolute blast. And, yeah, I would totally be up for... If I'm available, I will absolutely do a one-shot, you know, probably several times if you guys want to have me, for sure.
Awesome. You can name your character Garth Evan if you like.
Garth Evan. Yeah.
That's a great name.
Well, of course,
great name.
Before the twist happens, you name your KotOR character, right? You've got to have like the nerdy Star Wars name for that. So, I guess you guys read the KotOR book, so you know that I have like a couple nerdy Star Wars names that I always use for those guys. But
yeah, I recently restarted KotOR because for the first time ever, I got like a nice PC, and I was like, I'm going to play this, and I'm going to add some mods and try this out.
Nice.
I named my character Turd Butt after my cat, because I'm like, I've added the play as a Wookiee mod. I'm like, okay, I'm going to base my character and her actions around my cat, and because she was being a butt, I called her Turd Butt, and then there's just something special about games when they say your name in text. because you've typed it in. It's like, hello, turd butt, we've got to go, or nice to meet you, turd butt.
Yeah.
There's something about that. That's so good.
I just always name my new character Revan.
Nice.
So it's
You're
like, what?
Not my first rodeo, people. Like, I know what's going on.
Yeah.
I like also just going with Evan, because wasn't Darth Malak, his Jedi name was Alec, right? So
Alec.
maybe it stands to reason
That's correct. Yes. That's why my avatar on Discord is the cover of the Revan book.
it's like,
So is
we're
Malak-
bad guys now. Let's each just tack a letter onto our names.
They were less creative back in those days.
Like, Malik got his jaw sliced off, so is he just trying to say Alec, but, like, it's coming out Alec because he's got to work harder to get
There
the
you
words
go.
out with the machinery?
That might have been my favorite part of the book was the battle over Malik's
Design.
jaw.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
yes. Yeah.
That was great.
Legendary little, like, basically the concept art director just hated everything about Malik, and so he basically was like, well, you can handle that one, because
Just looks the other way. Like, okay, yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen this mod or not, but Joe was attempting to play KotOR with a sexy Malik mod.
Yeah. See,
And now that's all I could envision when I was reading. Every time Malik would come up, I'd be like, I don't want to think about sexy Malik.
yeah, it's
Damn
basically
you,
his
Joe.
outfit, but like cut away a lot of the stuff, and it kind of looks more like a BDSM thing. And it was just so I wanted to make a video, but KotOR, being kind of an older game, was not playing with my capture software, so I couldn't. But it's still, every time I booted it up, because Malik is on the main menu, it's just him standing there with his like nipples out. I'm like, thanks, mod community. This is a thing.
definitely not gonna Google image search this thing immediately after this.
Yeah, don't.
Definitely not.
No.
For any listeners out there, assume I've never seen Darth Malik's nipples, and I don't plan on seeing it in the next 5 minutes after I get my Google browser open.
That's gonna maybe that can. I mean, that could be a good like forum name. Darth Malik's nipples. I can see that.
Yeah.
On reddit.com/u/Malik's nipples.
And I feel like we've hit the point that we usually do, where maybe the conversation is time to stop.
Yeah.
This happened last
This
time.
does tend to happen where it's time to. Once you hit Malik's
it's
nipples,
time.
you know you've taken it as far as it can go.
Yeah.
That's going on the next T-shirt.
What, that whole quote?
Yes.
Once you've hit Malik's nipples, you've gone too far.
Well, the book was supposed to come out on April 9th, but I'm gonna have to like cancel that, right? Get all those copies burned and write a new chapter about Malik's nipples and the implications
right.
of his.
Especially if it's being printed in China.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If we're gonna roll out of here and let you get to whatever games you need to play, if you need to hop on Battlefront 2, we'll let you get to that. But if you would like to take a moment and tell people where they can follow you for all your latest updates, please do so.
Yeah, so I mostly live on Twitter at Alex J. Kane, Kane, and you can find me writing for StarWars.com and Polygon and whoever else will open the door and let me, come write for them. So yeah.
And okay, I'm sure we've said it a bunch now, but the book is called Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic from Boss Fight Books. So
Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic from Boss Fight Books. Yep,
comes out on April 9th, and
April 9th.
I think we're all very comfortable saying that everybody listening should go get it and read it because it's great. I think even if you haven't played KotOR, you'd still dig that book because it's just a really cool journey through the development of one of like the biggest, gaming milestones of Star Wars.
Yeah, I think if you have any interest in game development or even just in Star Wars in general, there seems to be something in there for you.
If you like behind the scenes stuff, that's enough to go get this book. It's great. I love it.
Thanks so much.
All right. Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Joe and Leo. And thank you, listeners. Hope you enjoyed this, and we will talk to you in a little bit.
Commentary. Yes, Master. Did I ever tell you how much I enjoy killing for you, Master?